I think the real estate market is going to formalize itself. It is going to become a lot more concentrated in a few hands. We will emerge from this wild west scenario of real estate into a more structured form where you're not getting 16, 20, 25% appreciation per year. Maybe you're getting 2% appreciation per year, but it's a stable business. In fact, mistakes are probably the best thing that happened to you as a young person.
I think colleges sell them a dream that disappoints them to no end.
I don't have an Instagram account. I don't have any of the apps on my phone. I don't have a television at home. So yeah, I live under a rock.
Welcome to another episode of Europe Beyond Blueprints. Today on the episode, we have architect Amit Khanna from AKDA Designs in New Delhi. Amit is not only an architect by heart, he's also made a big play into the construction industry, into the real estate space. Our conversation today ranged from his life journey, where he was brought up in Nairobi, how he shifted to Delhi, and all his life experiences that has gone into building a very successful practice as well as a fantastic business.
Hi Amit, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Let's rewind back. Let's go a little further back in your career.
Yeah.
So how was your childhood? How did you grow up? How did you come into this field? Did you always want to become an architect, and now you're doing a lot of real estate projects as well? So let's take us through that journey, please.
So it is complicated, but it's sort of interesting because I'm not really from Delhi. Right, even though I practice and work in Delhi now, I'm not a Delhi boy, if you know what that means, right? So there is a conceptualization about Delhi men, and I don't fit into that conceptualization at all. I grew up in Nairobi, which is in Kenya, and I had a childhood which was formed by really, really good weather, right? And also by a lot of freedom, right? Because we were living... we didn't have there was no structure of a joint family. There was no structure of, any other, we didn't have to go to weddings on weekends. We didn't have to, there was none of the childhood staples that I see my own children sort of, going through that, you have to, follow these social norms or whatever. And so we grew up there. Then when we moved back into India, we were in Bombay for a bit. And Bombay is also
How old were you?
I was in my early teens, I say.
Okay.
Yeah, so most of my childhood in Nairobi and then the last bit in Bombay. And in Bombay, again, it was a very free city, right? And because, again, there was no family there. And I think Bombay makes you an extremely independent person because you learn how to catch the local, you learn how to avoid the Borivali fast and go for the, the normal trains. And believe it or not, I used to cycle to school. Right, which is unheard of, right, in this sort of environment. And I think that gave me a sense of real independence, right, when it came to not only living but also decision making, right? So it was never a question of, okay, what is the normal way to do things? It was always a question of, okay, these are the facts, and okay, let's see how we make that decision, right? When it comes to wanting to become an architect, right? So you have to dial it back a bit. When I was in Nairobi, I had this uncle who used to work for the UN, right? It was a family friend.
Right.
And he seemed to have a fabulous life, right? He was an architect and he was trained here in Delhi, and he moved to Nairobi to work for the UN. He used to take us out swimming in the afternoons, right? He was always available. And he used to be very chill about everything. And I looked at the guy, I was like, this seems like a great life to have, right? And so somewhere in the back of my mind, I always wanted to be an architect, right? And for something as stupid as freedom, right? About what you can do. I saw everyone else, they had to do these 9 to 5s. My dad would travel all over East Africa for business, right? He would be home only on the weekends. And I would see that, this is a fabulous choice to have. And coincidentally, what happened is when I moved back to Delhi and I then moved from into college,
right,
I had the option of going into journalism or going into architecture. I actually did 2 weeks of journalism before my results came out for SPA. That's when I moved to SPA. And it was that serendipitous that, now I'm an architect.
It's funny, huh? It was this family friend that got you hooked
onto it. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about what he actually did, right? And I often say this up to, any young people who will come to me and they'll want to talk about, okay, how was your journey during architecture and how did you decide? I tell people that if you knew, in retrospect, now that I know, if you knew at 22 how hard it is going to be an entrepreneur for 20 years before you sort of make it,
Right.
I would never do it. I would never, if I knew now, if I knew then what I knew now, I would never take that decision of, buying 2 tables and 3 chairs and setting up an office, right? I would have gone to the US like all of my peers and worked in Gensler or worked in SOM, and I would have, lived a standard issue corporate life.
But I think the journey would have been fun, right?
Yeah, I mean, incredible. So I would say that, like this conversation I was having with someone just recently, and they said, well, why do you beat yourself down? You did so well.
Yeah.
Right? Because people associate, in my peer group, I have done, let's say, better than average. However, I don't think I'm better than average. I think my career has coincided with the real estate boom in India. I have been fortunate enough that the profession that I chose was in a great demand over the past 20 years. If I had been an architect working out of Poland or Ireland, I would have been doing kitchen renovations at the age of 45, right?
Right.
But at this time in my life, in 25 years of practice, I've done 150 buildings. We've built towers and factories and this
Right.
and that. And it's unheard of as far as a normal conventional architectural practice is concerned. And it's my journey is not, singular in India, right? There've been hundreds of practices that have been elevated by this boom.
Yeah, but you still got to be like, you still have to be at the right place at the right time and
Exactly.
have done the right thing to be to have
Exactly.
been there.
And
right?
this comes back to the conversation we were having earlier about luck.
So when you made this pivot 5 years into your career, getting into the construction, how easy or hard was it landing your first client?
So I would say that getting clients was never a challenge,
Okay.
right? And I maintain that even till today. In India, if you want work and you don't have work, it's your fault.
I agree.
Right.
100%.
There is so much demand out there. We are fundamentally a supply constrained economy. People want good quality. People want stuff done well. People want it fast. There is nobody out there to support it. And I'd say even after 25 years in the industry, I think construction is still a very nascent, it's in a very nascent stage of development in India. There are a few large contractors who are equipped to do big projects, the L&Ts and the Aluwalias and the whatnots of the world. But at the level of less than 100 crore contracting, the number of people who are sort of competent enough to deliver projects that are between 10 to 100 crores is still very small, right? Because the amount of integration required, you need to be able to talk to a lighting consultant, while at the same time, you need to be able to sort out the billing of a guy who's running 4 people, right? So you need to be able to you need to have that spectrum of ability that allows you to negotiate a large contract. Let's say you're purchasing windows or a facade for a commercial building, right?
Right.
And let's say that's a 5 to 10 crore rupee contract. You need to be able to have that technical ability to look at 40 shop drawings and mark them up and associate it with cost. At the same time, you need to be able to talk to Ramlal and say, you know what, the chamfering on this stone is not done correctly. Please take an extra 20 rupees a square foot, but please do it properly, right? So that spectrum of ability that you need to have to deliver these projects, I think is still sort of rare in the country, right? Which is part of the reason why we're in business.
So that gets me to ask you the question that why do you think it's so hard? It's just because it's, I don't know. I mean,
it's a complex thing, right? There's a lot of moving parts. So on a typical project, let's talk about
it's difficult to scale this kind of a model.
It's not only difficult to I would say it's hard to manage all the supply side issues, because you have on a typical building, you're going to be dealing with about 40 plus vendors slash suppliers.
Right.
You're also going to be dealing with about 25 to 30 on-site contractors,
Yeah.
right? You're also going to have to deal with 5 to 7 specialized consultants. Bringing them all together and producing a building out of it, it used to be a fairly straightforward task, I would say 25, 30 years ago, because the expectation that a light has to perform in a certain way, it has to have building automation. And so the expectation that, okay, when I press this switch, it needs to talk to the curtain, it needs to talk to the light, it needs to talk to the air conditioning, and all of this needs to come together to provide a result for the client. I think that complexity didn't exist 25 years ago, right? It was simpler.
A switch just have to switch on the light.
Correct, right?
And a
now,
tube light.
And now what the client doesn't see, right? And for instance, you go to a nice hotel and you know, when you enter the room knows you're there, right?
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
even have to put the key card anymore, right? That complexity requires a lot of back-end, work. And who's going to do the work? Obviously, the lighting consultant and the electrical consultant and the automation guy, they will all do their own roles, but they sit in their silos, right? And you as a generalist, or me as a generalist, has to integrate all of that and make sure that the result is achieved for the customer. I think that complexity is really hard to grapple with for most people.
Yeah.
And which is why good projects in India take very long. I'm sure you've heard of houses taking five years. And
Of course. I've seen some of my very closest friends go through that struggle.
yeah, right. And ostensibly, these people are working with the finest in the business, right? And still, it's hard to do because it is hard to do. It's not like people are being lazy or people are being feckless about it.
I also find that clients change their requirement very
But
often.
if your house is going to take 5 years, then by the time you were making a teenager's room, now you have to account for his wife. So it is going to change, right?
Right. Yeah. How's the construction industry in India overall developing, and where do you see the real estate play in New Delhi going?
So I think that we are at a very, very initial stage of the real estate development in this country, right? I think it's extremely informal. It's extremely scattered, right? You have these small enclaves of beautiful perfection, right? Which are made by high quality developers.
Right.
But 99% of the urban experience is still of a very poor quality.
Correct.
Right? Now that urban experience is going to dramatically improve, right? As wealth levels in India rise. And I think income levels in India will go up for the next 10, 15 years, right? Irrespective of what happens globally, in terms of tariffs or
We are expected
protectionism.
to grow.
I think India is going to grow simply because there's so many consumers that are rising out of poverty, right? I think the real estate market is going to formalize itself. It is going to become a lot more concentrated in a few hands, because that's typically what
we
happens.
can already see that, right? With DLF doing very well in the NCR area, and then you go to Bangalore, then you have Prestige that has come up as
Or
a very
Embassy
big,
or-
or Embassy. Couple
Yeah.
of players in Bangalore have come up. Mumbai is also now getting dominated by a couple of players. I think
Yeah.
that we can already see.
Yeah, and I think the parallel that I normally like to tell people is that India is where, in real estate, where Campa Cola used to be the most popular product,
Yeah.
right? We still don't have Coke.
Yeah.
We still don't have Sprite and what all, right? So we still at the stage where we are locally producing all of the high quality buildings that we need, but we are woefully short of the actual number of buildings that we need. If you think about this area, right? If you think about South Delhi, Vasant Vihar, do you think we have enough hospitals? The closest hospital to Vasant Vihar is in Fortis, which is like 6 kilometers away.
Don't ask. My wife was in the hospital for a while, and then every day we had to go to Max Arcade.
Exactly, right? So
That was like a torture.
in a high quality urban environment, a hospital should be close,
Yeah.
right? You should have high quality schooling. Now I know that you relocated simply to be close to your daughter's school, right?
It was for there was a little play of destiny in that, but yes, the driving factor to shift was to be closer to my daughter's school.
And which sort of suggests, like if you look at the converse, it suggests that schooling is also pocketed.
Oh yeah,
It's not like no matter where you live in Delhi, you have access to a good quality school 10 minutes away.
No,
right?
it's not only access to good quality school. We're digressing a little bit on this, but how do you get into that school? I'm an outsider. Me and my wife.
And so the number of schools are
Number
also
of schools
less.
are less.
Right. And which basically comes down to the same thing. We don't have enough high quality buildings. Right. Now, I think what will happen, right? I'm not sure about this, but I think what will happen is that as valuations increase, there will be interest in real estate from a formal investing point of view, where large commercial groups that are currently not looking at real estate will start looking at real estate as an sort of a good quality asset.
Right.
And we will emerge from this wild west scenario of real estate into a more structured form where you're not getting 16, 20, 25% appreciation per year. Maybe you're getting 2% appreciation per year, but it's a stable business and it's a stable, it's a stable industry. It also means that the processes by which you purchase a building, right? So for instance, you have to purchase a house, let's say. The process currently is that you first go and buy land, then you hire somebody to design it, then you hire somebody to build it. The only alternative that you have is that you go and buy a ready-made condominium somewhere, right? That process is currently extremely informal.
Extremely and long.
And long, right?
Very long. Yeah.
If you look at I would not say an advanced economy, but if you look at a highly developed economy, when you go and buy a 1-gallon milk jug, right? The shape of that jug fits into the square that's there in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Right? That integration through product suppliers is not prevalent here in India, right? So the person that manufactures A product and the manufacturer of the B product, they don't talk to each other, right? Even though 99% of the time, the A product is going to be used with the B product. I'll give you an example. When you do a exterior grade false ceiling, right, you have to screw it into a subframe.
Correct.
Right? That exterior subframe should ideally be sold by the same guy who's selling you the ceiling, right? But in his head, that's an aluminum product. And this is a, different material product. So why should I, I'm not in the aluminum business, right? I'm in the HPL business. So why would I get into the aluminum business? But you look at IKEA, when it sells you a chair, next to that chair, there will be a little thing which says, here is where you can buy 4 screws and a screwdriver. And when you pick that up, right? So what we do in our line of business is that we provide you the simplicity that, okay, you're buying this chair, you'll need the hammer, right? So let me sell both of these things to you together. But right now, I think at the supplier end, that integration is not there. And that is something that is a sign of a developed economy where it can predict that, okay, my product is going to be used in this fashion. Right now, the designer in India dictates how the product is going to be used, irrespective of whether it's a smart way of using the product or not, right? I have this very, extreme example of a project that we were working where the interior designer wanted a 17-foot long metal frame to be powder coated. And I said, well, how am I going to powder coat this thing, right? Either you let me powder coat the individual pieces and let me assemble it by hand. But they say, no, I don't want to see any joints. So that means that there is a lack of understanding of how the product is getting manufactured, right? And so I think what tends to happen is that as a industry improves and becomes more knowledgeable, acquires more depth, the processes by which the industry produces their product also becomes quicker and more integrated. And I think we are way, way away from that right now. So, but it's so much better than what it was when I started business, right? So I'm very positive. I think this is the best business to be in, right? Partially because I enjoy it so much, but this is really the best business to be in this stage.
When you started off with the construction space, what are like 3-4 things that you learned the really hard way that comes to your memory?
Okay, the first thing that I realized was that you need to be fundamentally good with money, right? And that's not something that you're taught as an architect.
I don't think you're taught in any profession, by
And-
the way. It's
and-
nothing to do with architecture, but yeah.
And like I mentioned earlier, right? I'm not from Delhi. My dad was not in business. My dad used to work for the government. And when I entered my business, when I started my business, I had already lost my dad, much younger in my life. And there was no sort of metric out there, or there was no system out there into which I could go and plug in and say, okay, you know what, I'm a young entrepreneur. I want to be able to do business in this city, but you're not taught how to deal with cash, right? That's a big part of working in India. You're not taught how to, what to buy with cash and what not to buy with cash, right? And it's not something that, obviously we have now moved far away from all of that because we don't work in that space anymore. But when you're starting out, people think that, okay, this is the ideal situation in which I can dump some of my cash. And, we didn't know what to do with it. So I think that was a huge challenge for me because I had grown up in a household that had no concept. My dad was with the government and there was no concept of, okay, what do you do with this bundle of money? That was a big, big issue, right? And obviously you learn how to, over a period of time.
Do you have someone who mentored you through that phase?
Not really. I think what happens was that, and I think what has happened with me is that all of my clients have been mentors, right? So as an architect, you tend to work with people who are at a certain stage in their life. My typical client is in their early 50s to late 60s. People who have enough money to afford a building, basically, right? And buildings are expensive. And it's not normally the case that we get somebody who is in their 20s and 30s and comes and says, okay, I'd like to, get this building made or something. Typically, we are working with either very senior management or very wealthy owners. Right. Now, what happens is that once you're working with somebody on a building for, let's say, a year and a half, you have conversations. You learn a lot through those conversations, right? So you pick up something from one client and then you pick up one more thing from another client. I distinctly remember once, this is in 2009, we were building this home for this very senior executive who used to work at ITC.
Okay.
And I think from him, I learned how to remotely control, right? Because he used to be based in Calcutta. We were doing a project for him here in Delhi. And he made me work so hard on the project without ever turning up, right? He would call me for 45 minutes and he would rattle off, and he would have this conversation with me and he would manage me.
He was very structured, I would assume.
Yeah, he knew how to provide feedback.
Right.
He knew how to control outcome. He was good at setting targets. Right. And it would just be a very informal conversation. He would never give me a list, right? He would just chat with me. He would say, "Acha, kya ho raha hai? Acha, uska kya hua? Acha, tumne usse baat ki ki nahi?" And that would give me, okay, I need to do all of this before my next call with him. Because in my next call with him, if I haven't done that, then it's a failure, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So he was very good at sort of managing. And then recently we worked with with the chief executive of a very large hotel group. And what I learned from him was really an exercise in how to hire high quality senior people. So what happened is that he called me over for lunch and, we had a meal together and then we went for a walk. We talked about everything under the sun except the project, right? And after we had finished the conversation, right, I think he had made up his mind to work with me. And I think what I learned was that when you're dealing with senior people, you can't make it about their CV, right?
They already have the skills.
Right? You have to presume that they're in this room, right? Therefore, they already have those skills. Yeah. What you need to do is you need to build up a measure of trust and a measure of how well you can communicate with one another. And I think if you can talk to each other and you can trust that person to do that job, then you've hired the right person. And I think what he did in my case, he was hiring me to do a job, right? He didn't talk about the money. He didn't talk about, my problems and how he just said, okay, this is what I want to do. You seem like the right guy for the job. Let's do it, right? Now, what did that put on me? normally with a guy who's haggled a lot with you, you'd be like, "Acha yaar, tu khud hi kar le," right? Because you've not left me any money to make. But with this guy, I couldn't complain about anything.
Right.
I couldn't complain about the money. I couldn't complain about the autonomy. I couldn't complain about anything, right? So essentially, it was up to me to deliver the expectations that the gentleman had. And I think that's a very, very powerful lesson for me, that when I'm hiring a senior person now, I don't want to micromanage their day,
Yeah.
right? I want to be able to give them a sort of an outline of what it is that we are doing here, and I need to trust them. And I wasn't there yet, right? But after working with him, I feel that okay, I need to be in that space.
I learned this actually a couple of years ago. In fact, the last 3 senior hirings I've had, and all 3 have happened in the last 6 to 12 months. Coincidentally, during the interview process and multiple interview rounds, the work was 10 minutes just to test whether they, like what they've written on the CV,
Correlates.
is true or not. And the rest 45 minutes to an hour and a half that I spent with them was on life.
Yeah.
What's their life story? What's my life story?
Correct.
How do they look at various situations? And just the question that used to come to my mind was, would I be able to spend, like, if when the pressure, at work, there's a crunch time that's going to come,
Yeah.
right? During the crunch time, when you're back against the wall, would you be able to spend 6 to 14 hours huddled together in a room trying to solve a critical issue without getting irritated with the other person?
Yeah.
Would you be able to, will the samne wala be able to push me back if I'm making a wrong call?
Yeah.
Do they have it in them to give it back in the right way? And
Yeah.
are they receptive to feedback in general in life, not only related to work? Because, if you're in a crunch project and, you have to go for a couple of weeks and you're going to be out traveling or huddled together trying to solve a big problem, if you don't have that comfort and trust on each other, you're not going to solve that big problem.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, how do you can't test somebody for integrity, right? You have to be able to have that conversation and
Figure it out.
figure it out, right? That, okay, this guy seems like the kind of guy who's not going to cut a side deal and be shady about it, right? This guy looks like he's legitimate, right? Jo ye maang raha hai, usi mein ye khush hai, right? And of course, that I'm sure in real estate, that is a huge issue, right? And it's something that is part of the reason why we went into the construction business. I think the other thing that I want to talk about is, recently I met somebody for the first time. This person was a swimming pool vendor, right?
Okay.
Manufactures swimming pools. And I met him at a society event in the evening, and we introduced ourselves. And I said, well, I've signed an invoice for your company. He says, yes, you have. I said, yeah, but we've never met. And so it was interesting that my company and his company were doing business.
Yeah.
And yet we had never spoken to each other on the phone, and we had never, we never had a conversation, because I think we are at that stage now. I mean, that we are senior employees in my company and senior employees in his company were able to come to a conclusion as regards to, what we were purchasing, without me having to pick up the phone and say, "Hanji sir, kya hal chal hai? Kuch to kar do." Because it doesn't really matter beyond a point if I'm going to pick up the phone and get an extra % out of it. And if my profitability rests on me getting that extra 1%, then I'm in the
fundamentally wrong
then there's a
business model.
fundamentally wrong
Yeah.
business model, right?
Yeah.
It can't be that I am driving all the negotiation in all of the purchasing in the business and therefore making money, right? And I think that is something that has to sort of become more prevalent.
Right.
I am actually a huge fan of design build, because I think that the eventual outcome that the client wants is best suited, at least for small projects. I mean, the 100 crore plus projects, like, if you want to make a shipping port or airport, or if you want to, lay down, I don't know, 2 million square feet of mall space. I think that is not something that a design build model should do.
Right.
But if you talk about, buildings which are anywhere between 10,000 to 20, 30,000 square feet, the government has also started doing it, by the way. They've started giving out EPC contracts, right? Engineering, procurement, and construction contracts. And I think there is a recognition that this process, which is the tripartite process of client, architect, contractor, and now project manager, I think there's a fundamentally incorrect model, right? It cannot produce a good quality outcome because the architect is only invested in producing a coherent set of drawings much later in the design process,
Okay.
right? You can't expect an architect on day one to produce an extremely coherent set of drawings. It doesn't happen. Site conditions dictate that things will change. Clients' budgets change, priorities change. A contractor cannot be expected to nail down the cost of the project on day one without looking at a coherent set of drawings.
Right.
So you're in this stuck in this,
A lot of ambiguity,
there is
uncertainty.
uncertainty, right? Because the client is not fully articulated. The architect has not produced a full set of drawings. The contractor doesn't know what has to be built. Yet the expectation is that we need to pin down the 100 rupees that we're going to pay to the contractor right now, and we want to negotiate it in 99. And we also want the building in 18 months.
Right.
And so the ideal thing to do is to combine these two people and say, okay, what? You know each other, right? You have to work with each other. We are giving you the 100 rupee contract, right? This is the general outcome we want, and you're the specialist, right? If you have to go to a dentist and the dentist says, okay, I'm going to charge you 40 rupees for drilling, 20 rupees for cleaning, 30 rupees for this, you'll be like, mujhe kya matlab? Right? You tell me how much the implant is going to cost, right? And that's what we need to arrive at in terms of buildings. And
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so, and I think I'm happy to be in the space where I am, where we are dealing with a lot of complexity. It's kind of stressful sometimes because you have to deal with every manner of problem. You have to deal with the fact that, okay, on your factory project, there is 300 metric tons of steel, which because of an incorrect paint application has started to rust, right? And you're working for a Korean conglomerate and they have a high standard and you can't have rusting paint. On the other hand, you have to deal with, on a small residential project, because the UPS strip, the curtains are not working anymore. Right. So you have to be able to deal with all of this complexity and not sort of get flustered with it. If you're the sort of personality that is going to lose your mind, कि सब कुछ खराब हो रहा है, then you shouldn't be in this business. But if you can deal with it, if you're happy to have that information come in and not let it affect your day, and have a structure around which you can get people to do various things, I think this is the only way to produce buildings, at least in India, for the short term. I don't think that we should rely on the architect contractor system.
What I hear you saying is that largely the model needs to evolve to a solution driven
Exactly.
concept. Not
it can't be key. Like if you think about 20 years ago, you used to hire a taxi, right? And that taxi used to have a driver, and that it was a separate ecosystem, right? You had to call somebody and they would send a cab. Now it's a trip oriented thing, right?
Yeah.
You need to get there, right?
Yeah.
How do you want to get there? You want to go there in an Innova, you want to get there in a whatever.
And the best part is that the middle guy who's providing the solution neither owns the driver, neither owns the car, neither owns the maps, the tech, nothing. Everything is just put together to give you a seamless experience. But Uber or the Olas, and let's not talk about Blue Smart anymore, but these guys, they own their fleet, but Olas and Ubers are just aggregators who just give you a seamless experience.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to what I was saying about product manufacturers, right?
Right.
Right now, product manufacturers are also in silos.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see the application of the product. They say, okay, we have been told, our business has traditionally been, if you look at an aluminium supply, कि मैं 2 एक की tube बनाऊंगा 20 foot लंबी, and it may be used for 20 different applications, right? Somebody may use it to make a kitchen vanity frame. Somebody may use it to make it a framing for a false ceiling. Somebody may make a porta cabin out of it. But they needs to be, I'm not interested. I'm interested in the porta cabin, right?
I have a take on this, by the way, because I face this question every day in my business, because we make raw flush doors. Right? Every day someone will come up to me and say, can you give me a fully finished, fitted door?
Yeah.
आप हार्डवेयर भी लगा दो, विनियर भी लगा दो, उसमें मैं जो डिजाइन दे रहा हूँ वो कर दो, एंड मेरे आके कोई इंस्टॉल कर देना, एंड देयर इज अ बिग मार्केट फॉर दिस.
Yeah.
And I always grappling with the question, why are we not pivoting? It just makes so much intuitive sense. And the reality is that there is such a large arbitrage still available on my existing business model,
Absolutely.
that I have not scaled my existing business model. I can find that there is still scope to go 25 to 30% on my existing model. So why should I एक बेस बना हुआ है, उस पर मैं 20-25% की ग्रोथ अचीव करना स्टार्ट कर चुका हूँ, राइट? अब should I stay that course because the construction in India is going nuts right now, and just keep supplying a commodity product and grow it 25-30% year on year for the next 3-4 years? Or should I take up, and that scale and that speed of growth requires a lot of bandwidth, a lot of capital, a lot of hard work, right? Or should I pivot to this new model today, which could or could not work? And I personally get stuck on taking that call, and I've taken a call that I'm going to delay this project for another 2 to 3 years, and I'm going to stick to just growing my existing business, because यार 25% की growth कौन छोड़ेगा?
So I think it's going to have to be a bit of both, right? I think if you think about what you just said, there is a very high barrier to entry
Yes.
to making a ready-made flush door,
Yes.
right? Let's say it requires 100 CR in investment to
Right.
to produce a ready-made flush door, and another 25 CR on an annual basis
On
to
working
market
capital.
it, right?
Yeah.
And put it out there. You've already made 75% of the investment,
Right.
right? So for you, you have the advantage to be able to do this without breaking the bank
Right.
in a way, right? On the other hand, let's say, for lack of a better word, Mukesh Ambani decides that, okay, the flush door business seems to be like a great cash cow. Why don't we get into it?
Yeah.
And he can say, okay, we're going to allocate 500 crores for this. Can he beat your competitive advantage within 5 years?
No.
In that case, therefore, it's a high quality business, and therefore you should do it, right? And so the way that I would look at it is that you should always have we're still architects.
Right.
If somebody comes to me and says, there's this really big building that we want to build, but it's 2 hours north of Bangalore, I will take that conscious decision and I will say, okay, we're not going to do design build on that, but we'll design it for you.
Right.
Right. So I'm not leaving my core competency off the table, right? I'm still providing the service that I'm reasonably good at providing. In your case, I think it applies to the same thing. You should have the option to be able to do that as well. But obviously, you don't have to do it at the cost of the cash cow business.
Right.
Right. And I think the question is always that, okay, who else can be in the business? When I look at my business, right? And I think that unfortunately, a lot of architects don't look at their services as a business model, right? They think of themselves as, lone heroes, right? Unfortunately, right? But in my case, what happened was that, when I was much younger, I had to work, right? I had to feed a family, and, obviously it wasn't standard middle class Indian upbringing. And so this has been my source of income. Right. And this has been my source of livelihood for the past 25 years. And for me, I've been forced to look at it as a sustainable business model. And having a pure architectural firm where you're not making enough money on fees is therefore not a viable model for me. Right. And therefore, we moved away from residential. That is the first thing that we did.
Right.
And we moved into commercial. In commercial, it's much easier. You get your fees. You always get it on time.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely will it be unpaid. Very, very rarely. Unless you have really screwed up and the guy's like, yeah, I don't want to even talk to you. Right? Only then will it be that you lose out on fees. But 99% of the time, you'll always get paid. And because you're working with large businesses, right? For them, your fees and the building is a means to making more money. It's not a luxury for them, right? When you're making a factory for somebody, they are, you're making a 30 crore factory, but they're investing 200 crores in that project, right? Because they're putting in equipment, they're putting in manpower, they bought the land. And so for them, you're a part of the puzzle. You need to perform correctly and you need to get out, right? You can't make it about you.
Yes.
Right? And it can't be that, oh, I want it done this way and it should be this color and what. You have to be a service provider at that point. And I think that you should have in your head, whenever and this is mostly for architects, not so much for our conversation. architects need to think about their services as a viable business, right? And then the decision making that they will go through will be very different.
Architects need to think about. It is true, but I think more and more architects have started seeing it that way. That's what the gut sense that I'm getting now. After having done a bunch of these podcasts and speaking to people, I think that realization that they need to look at it from a perspective of business and not as a perspective of solely as an artist. That has started, I think, is especially with the younger generation coming up now into this field. I think that's becoming the driving force for them.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing to this. I give this example all the time. During the Renaissance in Italy, there were these two guys, right? There was Brunelleschi and there was Bramante, right?
Okay.
And I think what would happen with, I'm not Michelangelo, right? When I'm talking about myself, I'm not Michelangelo. I'm not going to give up my life to produce this thing of extraordinary beauty.
Right.
Right? It is not me.
Right.
My job is to produce what the client wants, get paid for it, and move on in life. It is not my life's work to produce 5 extraordinary buildings, right? And that's just the career path I've had, and it's the decision making I've taken. It's not like I make ugly buildings. It's not like our buildings are below par in any way. But we are not in the business of producing art, right? We are in the business of producing buildings, and our buildings need to perform far better than industry average, and they need to look the part, right? But I don't obsess over this line and that line and how it needs to be perfect and how that shadow falls. Yes, it needs to fundamentally work, but beyond that, I think it's wasteful for us to think that the client's money is here to satisfy our ego.
But if a client were to cut you a check and give you a white piece of paper and say design, blow your mind out, just design.
Give me an example of what sort of building type that would be, because it certainly won't be an office or a factory or a hotel.
Could be a resort, could be a hotel.
You think so?
I think so.
Because
ultra luxury travel is picking up in the country, and I think there is a demand that is getting created for unique esoteric where you can charge $1 lakh a night, right? If you're going to charge $1 lakh a night or 70,000 rupees a night as a room rate, it better blow the mind of the guest that's going to go and stay there, right?
So, for whatever reason, we haven't done much hospitality, right? We started off in life doing a lot of retail because retail is what comes to you as a young client.
घर भी शौकिया घर तो बनते हैं.
Yeah.
But I know you're not doing that much residential anymore.
Yeah, but I think then what I would respectfully say is that maybe we're not the right people for the job, because I think as a 46-year-old architect, do I have it in me to spend 5 years of my life producing an object of extraordinary beauty that is only going to be enjoyed by 5 or 6 people? I don't think so. I don't think that is what I want to do with my life, right? What I want to do with my life now is, deal with more public and civic spaces.
No, that's why I said ultra luxury resorts but that's also limited to a very elite.
I think even with such projects, people are driven by the bottom line, right? I mean...
No, of course, the developer is driven by the bottom line.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's not really our space, right? I think there is enough room in this industry for the designer and for the service provider to coexist. And I think I am not under any illusion that I am a avant-garde designer who is going to only make 5 buildings in his life. Right? I am not under that illusion. And maybe after 10 years, I may shift track and, maybe I've built enough and now I want to just do these 2 buildings a year. But this space where I am in right now, I'm pretty sure that the growth of the country and its requirement for lots and lots and lots of normal background buildings, right, or hospitals and whatnot, is going to continue. And I think we're very happy in that space, right? So I don't think that, I don't want to limit myself and say, because if somebody wants to cut me a blank check, please let me not say no to that.
Chalo, that was a wonderful conversation. I think we'll have to cut this a little short. Otherwise, we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
go on talking for the rest of the day. So, thank you, Amit, for coming on the show and being very open and frank in your conversation. And it was great having you here.
It's great being here. Thank you.
Thank you.